Hi, on this episode of Things That Matter, I interview Joel Goldberg, and Joel is the director of Netivah Ministries in Israel. So stay tuned. Hi, and welcome to this episode of Things That Matter. Great to have you with us today. And today in the studio, I have a special guest, a friend from Israel. And Joel Goldberg is with us today. And Joel is the director of a ministry called Netivah that we're going to talk about as we progress in the time together today. But Joel, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and coming all the way from Israel. I mean, that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, it's a blessing to be here, and we've heard a lot about the Costa Mesa Calvary Chapel, and we're excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. Yeah. So I wanted to just talk about a few things, but first of all, just kind of personally, introduce you to our audience and find out a little bit about your background. So. You're an Israeli, but you weren't actually born in Israel, but you kind of...
I was born in the in-between, between
yeah.
America and Israel. My parents were in the process of immigration to Israel.
Yeah.
They lived in Israel before I was born, and then they moved back after I was born. And
right.
I was born in Baltimore,
You
Maryland.
were actually born in Baltimore. Okay, yeah. That's great. All right. So 2 years old, you moved to Israel. Mm-hmm. So basically, your entire life you've spent in Israel. Tell us a little bit about growing up in Israel. And you, if I'm right, you grew up in a Messianic Jewish home, right? Mm-hmm. A Jewish home that believed in Jesus as a Messiah.
Right. Actually, my father became a believer in the U.S. Navy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And in San Diego, not far from here.
Yeah, that's right.
And he met my mother that was there, and they went to Moody Bible Institute. And upon finishing Moody Bible Institute, they felt like God's leading them to missions. Somebody talked to them about going down to South America, but then their Jewish studies professor convinced them to go to Israel, since my dad's Jewish, and once they got there, they didn't want to leave.
Yeah. So that was back in sort of the not the earliest days of the Messianic movement in the country, but it was
quite in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
That was 1966.
Okay.
And 1967 was the 6 Days War, and they got stuck in Israel during the 6 Days War. Yeah. And I think that solidified their connection to the land.
Right. So you grew up in a bilingual home. Mm-hmm. You speak fluent Hebrew and mm-hmm. English. So what was it like, as a kid growing up in Israel?
Well, first of all, my parents originally were immigrants to Israel. So you're finding your identity as an immigrant. Mm-hmm. But second of all, you're finding your identity as a believer in Jesus in a culture and community that is actually has a negative view of Jesus, negative view of Christianity, negative view of even more negative view as a Jew that believes in Jesus.
Yeah.
You can be a Christian that believes in Jesus, but if you're a Jew that believes in Jesus, you're breaking the rules of behavior. Yeah. So that was challenging.
So did you experience some of that sort of pressure growing up as a kid, like going through school and all of that?
Yeah. Growing up as a teenager, and probably this is the story behind the story of the reason that I do what I do with the teenagers. But growing up as a teenager in Israel, if you're from a family that believes in Jesus or you profess a faith in Jesus, you're seen as an outsider. Mm-hmm. You're seen as something odd, strange, an outsider. For me, growing up as a Messianic believer, we were so few that even if I was to say that I believe in Jesus, people would go like, who's Jesus, and why would you believe in the Christian faith, and if you're Jewish, and during the days that I was growing up, we had a small home group in our home, and one of the Saturdays we meet at Saturday morning. We had the shutters down, and we're praising and worshiping. And we hear a noise outside of the door, and 200 ultra-religious Jews with the black hats and clothes were shaking our fence down, waiting to get in.
Is that right?
Yeah, and within 10 minutes they were all in the house.
No kidding.
Yeah. So not a fun experience as a 10-year-old child, but understanding that there's something really different about us.
Yeah. So, what happened when they got in the house?
They jumped the kids jumped out for the back window and went over to the neighbors.
Yeah.
They tore up a bunch of stuff around the house and threw stuff. They were looking for crosses and for icons.
Is that right?
Yeah, they didn't find them.
Yeah.
Because most Messianic Jewish communities, that's
they
not an
probably
issue.
Assumed that you were Catholic or Orthodox.
But they prayed the prayer of the dead.
Yeah.
In our home.
Oh, did they really?
Yeah. So.
Wow. What an experience.
Yeah. But I really believe that growing up for me, later on and throughout the years that living in that neighborhood, I was always known as the Christian, the Notzri, we call him, and that's almost that's a degrading word, almost a cuss word.
Yeah. Wow.
Like if we'd argue and have a disagreement, and I was labeled as the Notzri, but I really believe that God used that in my life when you're so busy trying to be like everybody, when everybody else knows that you're different, I think that's God's way of saying, I'm keeping you. And I believe that God protected me in this area of trying to be like everybody else, but yet everybody else knew that I'm not like them.
Yeah, and I've had a history going back 30 plus years of visiting Israel, and I've often said to people that the kind of the plight in some ways of the Jewish believer, the Messianic believer in the country, is in some ways a lot of similarities to what you read about in the New Testament, with that kind of pressure, that kind of persecution coming from the established religious body there, and that kind of pressure that comes on the believers. Today, here we are in 2017, it does seem that the atmosphere is changing a bit. It seems like the environment, although of course you can still find that element of kind of hard opposition, but would you say that things are different now?
Yeah, first of all, we're talking about close to 30 years later. There's a lot more believers in the land. When I was growing up, there was maybe, 3,000, 4,000. Today, we don't really know numbers, but they're saying around 10 to 15,000 Messianic believers. Plus media is opened up and exposed a lot more. We're living in a postmodern era where people are open and media is accessible to everyone. And if somebody wants to know about Jesus or sees a movie or hears the name, they can just look up Jesus and it pops up. And so there's two sides to this. On one, there's the religious, which are open to Christianity. By the way, there's a growing understanding amongst the Jewish people in Israel that the Christian evangelical world, they're friends, which is very important. and we find Christian Zionism taking a lot of that in relationship with the Jewish, and the religious accepting it. But there's an objection when it comes to, well, it's fine if you're a Christian and you believe in Jesus, but if you're a Jew that believes in Jesus, you're breaking the rules. You're out of the norm, and you're in danger of you're even a danger to the rest of society because you can influence them. Where on the other hand, we have a postmodern growing community. The majority of Israelis are atheists or agnostic.
Yeah.
And so tolerance is the new religion.
Yeah, right.
And acceptance and understanding and who you are and what are you talking about. And there is a greater opening towards us as believers, together with opening towards all kind of other stuff. Yeah. And I believe that for us as Messianic believers in Israel, this is an opportunity. We can either enjoy the fact that we're accepted and everything's good and they know about us and we're not a threat anymore, or it's an opening for us to share the gospel and to be active in our approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Joel, speaking of this kind of new sort of atmosphere that's a result of postmodernism and these different combination of things. A lot of people wouldn't know that a city like Tel Aviv, of course, a very, very secular city, very large city, is kind of, sort of prides themselves in being the gay capital of the region. And I've spent a bit of time there, and it has very much the feel of a very postmodern or late modern European city.
Tel Aviv prides itself on being open to everything, new, a non-stop city, Ir lelo hafsaka, they call it. So, and what we find also is a lot of young people, young adults, gravitate into Tel Aviv for a period of their life. When they're studying, during the years of university, and it's just one of these places that where everything's happening, so young people gravitate to there. It's a university town, and you're right.
Yeah, so you have been involved for most of your adult life, I think, in youth ministry, basically, right?
Yeah.
And you probably wouldn't agree with this necessarily, but I've had people tell me, well, Joel, he's sort of the youth pastor of the whole country, and I know you're a humble guy, so you probably would say no, but you obviously have had a lot of relationship with young people through all throughout the country,
right?
And what do you see happening with that? So, looking back to when you were, 17, 18, 19, 20, whatever, and now you're looking at these kids today. What do you see happening with them?
Well, I do think because of the changes that have happened in the last 30 years, the reality is different today for the teenagers. Yeah. There's first of all, if we're talking about sort of the Christian or the Messianic community of teenagers, first of all, there's still very few. And although the population is growing, we're still 0.02% of the population in Israel. Yeah. So that means these kids, they're many of them are the only believer in their school, only believer in their town. Yeah. If there's a small church, there'll be just a few believers from that church. But there is a more opening and awareness of the faith. There seems to be a more acceptance of us as people, but as soon as we talk about our faith. But here's something that I've found with this younger generation. They're open, they're bold, they're not ashamed. If during my days, when I came to the country, when I grew up in Israel, I was still a child of new immigrants, that my parents didn't know Hebrew fully. This new generation, they're homegrown. They're confident in who they are. They know they're confident in their ability to communicate. They're, like I said, they're bold and they're much more open than what my generation was, and maybe the gap generation between us also. So it's exciting actually watching what's going on.
Yeah, and what, again, maybe some of our listeners don't realize that the military service is mandatory for not just guys, but for girls as well. Yeah. And so you guys, this has been where the Lord's really sort of zeroed you in to focus on these young people that are going into the military and then even after their service kind of coming back out. So this brings us to Netivah. This brings us to your ministry.
Yeah.
So talk about that.
Okay. Well, this is about, for many years I've volunteered in as a youth worker. I'm a graphic artist by trade, and I ran my own business as a graphic artist and worked in Tel Aviv, advertising agencies, and during these years I was trying to just make a living, and at some point my wife just said, "Joel, if we're going to do this, we got to do it right. Let's stop, get some proper education for this." And sure enough, we did. We came to the States, studied for 2 years, and came back to Israel and formed Netivah. And Netivah was, how do we reach out to these teenagers where they're at? How do we support them and encourage them? How do we encourage the growth and maturing of youth groups within the local congregations? And even though they're small, how do we encourage it? And this is what we started doing. We did conferences for teenagers, seminars for youth leaders. And at some point, the young boys and girls that are going into the army, like you were saying, boys go in for 2.8 years and girls go for 2.4 years. And they came back saying, you've been doing conferences when we were teenagers. Why don't we continue doing conferences as soldiers? Yeah. And what we felt like is that the things that were relevant, and the soldiers just kept on coming to the teenage conferences because they were missing they were needing to connect. They were needing the fellowship. They were needing to be part of something. After weeks of being in the army with no fellowship, here's an opportunity. And we don't care for it with teenagers. It works. But we felt like God is leading us to do soldiers' activities, to provide them a time and a place where they can come and grow and mature and strengthen, but also talk about things that are relevant for a soldier. Yeah. And the things that are relevant for a soldier is, military day is a spiritual desert. If you're a strong believer, when you go into the army and you're all excited and you're ready to share the gospel and you know what you stand for, 3 years is a long time of chipping away on your values, on your faith, on the community of believers, of the things that are important for you. And we want to provide these spots where soldiers can come and get filled and encouraged and built up. Times of worship, times of prayer, times of studying from the Word of God, talking into issues and topics that are relevant for them as soldiers in the IDF. And so you guys do like preparation for them going in. You're kind of equipping them for what they're going to face. Right. You try to give them times of refreshment during their time in the military, and then trying to follow up with them afterwards as well. Right. And I'm sure it's beneficial that you've all been there yourselves. Yeah, everyone in the leadership, right? I've been a staff sergeant for more than 25 years. Yeah. So and the rest of our team, we've all served in the military. Yeah. 2 of our guys are captains in the military. Yeah. Different people have served in a highly qualified units. Yeah. So what the soldiers are going through, we know what they're going through. Yeah.
So is it safe to say that you're optimistic about the future of the gospel work in Israel?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great.
Absolutely. I'm watching, as a youth worker and youth leader, I would say that the body of believers in Israel is going through an adolescent stage. And what I mean by adolescent, they're forming their identity. They're growing, they're maturing, they're strengthening, they're building up the muscles that they need in order to face the things that are ahead of them. Yeah. And I'm watching. And it's not like there's huge revivals happening in Israel. Yeah. But there's a steady, ongoing, faithful growth amongst the believers and a maturing. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
So for the folks that are tuning in, to this broadcast, how can we help? How can we pray? What can we do?
Right. I'm excited about what's going on, and I love coming out and sharing not about what Netivah is doing and the ministry that we're doing, but what God is doing.
Yeah.
And I believe that when the saints hear about God's work in one place, when they hear the works in the hands of God in Israel, I believe that this is a sign for all mankind, that God is at work.
Yeah.
He's fulfilling the promises. He's bringing back his children into the land, and He's restoring them. Anyone that has been in Israel knows it's not an easy place.
Yeah.
They're still stubborn, stiff-necked people, and they are they're in rebellion to the gospel.
Yeah.
So pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the peace of the Jewish people. Share the gospel with the Jews.
Yeah.
I think many people think that, well, Jews, we don't need to. God has a plan for the Jewish people. Well, I do believe that the worst form of anti-Semitism is keeping the gospel from the Jews.
Yeah.
So pray for Israel, pray for the Jews, pray for the ministries that are involved. One of them is Nativa.
Yeah, and you and I have had a little bit of this conversation, but as I was, just a while back, as I was kind of praying, we've been involved in missions all around the world for many years, and I just started praying, Lord, is there it's sort of like some new area that, that you might want to move us into, and amazingly to me, it really kind of shocked me that the Lord really put Israel in our heart. Going over and doing the tours has been wonderful, but I just began to sense, maybe we need to do more than that. And as I prayed about it, it just felt like the Lord said, just see how you can come alongside what I'm doing and just encourage it. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you.
Yeah.
It's been an encouragement for us coming and watching what God is doing here. And yes, we know that you guys are standing behind us, and it encourages us.
Awesome. Well,
thank you.
Thanks. One last thing. Do you guys have a website? Can somebody go to a website and see?
Yes, we do.
In English?
Netivah, Netivah.com.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you very much.
All right. And thanks for joining us today. So hope you enjoyed the broadcast, and we'll look forward to being with you the next time. God bless you.